Hi, I'm Peter. I'm the owner and pitmaster of Pitt County Barbecue. I grew up in Alberta, and I've been lucky to experience what this great province has to offer. Join me as I talk to farmers, friends, and colleagues. I want to share with you what I love about food and what I enjoy about the great people who live here. Welcome to Friends of the Pit. So year 2, you moved the garden here, and then before that, where was it?
Actually just straight across the road there in the cattle pens. That's where the garden started. And that was where my personal garden started. And then when I decided I wanted to do the market garden, I expanded into the sorting pens and everything. I basically utilized every inch possible. And I had vertical growing and rows were spaced super close. And it was amazing. It was like probably my favorite garden I've ever grown, but super labor intensive because it was all done by hand and like I couldn't use any equipment and stuff like that. So then year 2 was when this came over here and I took over this little plot here, which is about 3.5 acres, give or take.
And that was?
1/4 of an acre.
Nice. And what has changed from year 5 now, from year 2, for what you've planted or the layout or anything that's really gone differently?
Yeah, a lot. Like my business has grown a lot since year 2, sorry, which is good. And I've learned a lot of things about what not to do and what works well. The biggest challenge in this particular piece of land is there's a low spot that goes right through my garden. And so it wasn't an issue in year 2 because it was a really dry year. But then in my 3rd year, we had rain nonstop, like every single day, and it was flooding. I had an actual channel coming through my garden, and I had crop losses, and it just never stopped. It was just wet all the time. It was standing water. So the last 2 years, we worked really hard. We've brought dirt in and, sloped it and tried to scrape it down a little bit and level it out. And it's better. And this year has been a dry year again, so it's not as noticeable, but it takes one rain and I've got water standing again. So
is there anything that flourishes with the heavy, like, sitting water?
It probably would, but not to that extent. It kind of is just, if we didn't start shaping it, it would be a dead spot in my garden. So it's something that like really needs to be worked on and corrected. And each year is a little bit better too. And I've learned where to strategically place my rows because of that.
So starting out, you've got the zucchini.
Yes, a lot of them, probably too many of them actually, but they do really well on this side here. It's higher ground.
Did you anticipate them being this prominent this season, or why did you grow so many?
So I grew so many because originally I was planning to harvest them young with the flowers. So they're like, one's right here. And you can eat the whole thing.
Because a lot of people will stuff them.
Yeah, and then deep fry them.
Did you, with your restaurant partners, did you have a lot of people requesting the blossoms?
Yeah, which is why I ended up planting so many plants. And for the first few weeks of the season, it actually worked out really nice, and I was able to pick quite a few and stay on top of things. And then zucchini is just a beast. So really, like, you turn your back for one day and you've got giants, and then once it starts, it's just really hard to stop. So now they're a little bit out of control, but I'm trying to find creative new ways and share that with people. And this is the unsung hero of the garden, especially in a drought, because this thing, like, they just grow.
They're
so
behemoth. They're the
yeah,
size
you
of my
can't
arms.
stop them. So that's why they're really nice. And then these 2 rows are both golden beets. This is a late sowing, and the nice thing about beets is that they can handle a frost. They're actually a little sweeter after one.
Interesting.
Yeah, it changes the sugar in them. I don't actually know the science of it, but it does
go dormant or something and then have to
maybe
break down the sugars into carbs.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it is noticeable a beet before frost and a beet after frost. Same with carrots.
Interesting.
So that's why, these are really young still, but they should be okay. We should still have another month or so of growing, even if we do get a frost. And then these were an earlier sowing of them, and they're beautiful beets. They're nice and gold and just the right size.
Oh.
And that's part of it too, is trying to keep them uniform, and so that they don't all just get big. It's better to have multiple sowings where you can keep them at a nice size.
And can you use the greens like a turnip green?
Oh, for sure. We eat our greens, our beet tops, like with bacon and cream and, all that goodness. You could cook it down like spinach. You can I have a CSA member that puts it in her smoothies all winter long. She freezes them and uses them in her smoothies.
Interesting.
They're so nutrient dense, right? They're great. They're a little powerhouse.
Yeah, because I know, growing up Ukrainian, or being Ukrainian, my grandma would always make the beet leaf cabbage rolls and everything.
Yes.
So she's been really happy to get them when she can.
Yes, I love those.
So here we have your fennel. Is this a typical size? Is this end of its growing cycle? Where is it right now?
These are pretty much ready to be picked out of the ground. These bulbs really produce well and they get quite big, which is nice for like roasting recipes and stuff like that, especially since we're so close to fall. They're great for like a roasted fennel and potato soup or things like that. And I guess salads, which is what you make too, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So these ones, I think I'll be harvesting them just in the next couple of weeks. And then they'll come out of the ground before a frost comes for sure. And then I have a later planting in another part of the garden, which I'm hoping will get to a bigger size by the middle of September.
And then this is an exciting crop.
It is. This is my cantaloupe crop. So it's something very new to me this year and a little bit unheard of for Alberta, although I know some other people do grow it well. But that's just the fun thing about having a garden, is that you get to try new things and kind of push the limits a little bit. And they're supposed to be a short growing season. They're a 70-day variety, and they're really small. So the sugars are compact, they're really sweet, and they're supposed to be a pretty vigorous producer as well. So I have yet to actually have one that's ripe, but I'm very much looking forward to it. We have some that are really close, and over here I have one that is my prized cantaloupe for the moment being. And it's got the webbing on it, and it's just starting to turn more of a yellow instead of a green. This is a unripe one, and you can see like it's more of a light green color, and then this one is starting to turn.
And smoother as well.
Yeah, it doesn't have the webbing on it just yet, but once you start looking, I mean, there's fruit everywhere on these vines. So now it's just a waiting game and to see which happens first, a ripe melon or a frost. And if it was just a light frost, I think I would be out here covering it with like bed sheets and whatever else I have, turning on the sprinklers or something just to kind of hold the frost off. But that's the joy of growing in Alberta.
Did they turn out better than you'd have hoped?
Yes, honestly, I really didn't know what to expect. It was something that I just I thought, well, the seeds are available, why not try them? But I had to start them indoors, and I really don't do well with transplants. My field is so exposed in the spring, and we get such big winds in Alberta right now that my transplants really suffer, even if I protect them or cover them or what have you. So most of my garden is all direct seeded, and that in itself does create some challenges, but for the most part, things do really well. You know, they're in the ground, they've already got their roots figured out, and they have the opportunity to flourish, whereas my transplants seem to suffer a little bit more. So I'm fairly pleased with how well these have done, especially for the dry, hot year that we have had. And I just hope that we get to actually eat one.
Are there many options for ground crop fruit crops in Alberta?
Not that I know of. I know some people have great success with certain watermelons, but a greenhouse or a hothouse of some kind does help. And I just don't have one of those set up yet. I think like strawberries and different berry plants is kind of where my mind would go for fruit.
Yeah.
Or rhubarb, which is technically a vegetable, but everybody thinks of it as a fruit. And once it's established, you can't kill that thing. So.
No, these are pretty exciting.
Yeah, I just really hope they turn out. I'm pretty stoked about it.
Personally, I love everything you grow, but this is one of my
Thank
favorite
you.
things that you grow. I think it's maybe one of the first points in contact we had with each other, where I
think so.
contacted you to get corn to try and make cornmeal,
Yeah.
which not a lot of people do. I think it's quite random, but it's just one of my weird ideas. But when I got it and dehydrated it and ground it, the flavor of corn in it and the sweetness from the cornmeal was like second to none. But I've never actually had anything like that before. So I got really, really excited and just wanted, I think I got over like 100 to 150 cobs from you last year for that project.
That seems about right.
So really excited about the corn this year because of how great it was last year. And it's seeming to be also fantastic this year too. So
Thank you. I think it's so neat, like just the fact, again, that, I'm not just dropping corn off with you, but then getting to see what you're doing with it. And it's something so creative and so unique. And it's just such a cool project. Like, I love being a part of that kind of stuff. Honestly, I think fresh corn on the cob is such a treat in Alberta that, when it's here, you don't waste that. Like, you just dive right into it for the most part, right? Our family, actually, the first cobs I started picking off, I think were 3 weeks ago, and I swear we've had corn for dinner every day since then. Like, it's just it's such a short season, so you just have to take full advantage of it.
well, and one thing I heard, but I don't know if it's right, you'll be able to tell me, is that with corn you actually have to plant it potentially closer together than the average person would think for pollination.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I've played around with it in different years. Last year I had my rows spaced out quite a bit because, especially once I've gotten to this scale of gardening, the need for equipment and different things is just, it just is more and more necessary because I'm only one person and I can only weed so much and I only have so many hours in a day. So being able to use something to help cut down on that work really makes my life a lot easier. So I was trying to space them out a little bit more to see if I could, like rototill in between the rows and try to manage the weeds a lot better, because corn does best with black soil where it has tons of heat units and it can just really soak up every nutrient. It doesn't want any competition. But a side effect of that was the fact that I didn't have them close enough for pollination. So this pollen all comes off of here, and then each silk is actually a kernel. So all of these little hairs is what gets pollinated from here. And that's how, like, the little yellow kernels on the actual cob, that's where that comes from.
So then when you have the baby corn, when it's super, super small, almost like the base of it,
Yeah.
then that's the start of all of that.
Yeah, it's just starting, right? And so what happens if your rows are too far apart is that, maybe not every single hair would get it, or silk. So you might have, lots up here, but then down here, it's not those uniform rows. So you might have a big one or a gap or something like that. So, it's still edible. It's just not that picture perfect corn that we're all looking for, right?
That everybody's used to because of the grocery stores.
Exactly.
It's not real corn.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why, like, this year, we actually used my garlic seeder to make my beds, and we when we plant garlic, it's in 3 rows in each bed, and the rows are 14 inches apart. So that's kind of how this is done. These stalks are all 14 inches apart, and it made the furrows, but unfortunately the corn seed is just too small, and I didn't have enough of it to fill the hopper because our equipment is a little bit too big for this. So I ended up planting this all by hand, which was a big task, but definitely worth it. And then we were able to use the same equipment that we used to cultivate our garlic field. I was able to clean it up in the cornfield here. So it actually did pretty well. And then it has enough walking space where the tire tracks are, so I can get down the rows and pick and weed if necessary.
And at this scale, not that this is a small scale, but it's not the full 3 acres, all hand harvest.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah. What would be that threshold of, I mean, it would be a whole new piece of equipment, obviously.
I feel like that's when you're talking about,
Fields.
Yeah, like we used to grow corn when we had cattle, and we'd silage it and harvest it and stuff like that, and that's when you would get an equipment or a piece of equipment for something like that.
Is there anything outside of the fact that it's from Tabor that makes Tabor corn?
No, that's exactly what it is. So this would be Rosebarrow corn.
Okay.
Or Wetaskiwin, which depending on how you associate that.
Whatever sounds better branding wise.
Yeah, right. But it's just a particular variety that has such high sugar content in it, and it's so sweet. And actually, the really neat thing about this corn this year, so everything about this growing season has been challenging. It's been tricky. We've talked about this a few times. So these first 3 beds I planted early, and I do that every year knowing full well that we get late frost in Alberta and it's a risk. So I did that, and I planted them out the very beginning of May, because even though this is a short growing variety, our summers are still quite short. So that's, like, you'll hear me talk about that constantly when we're talking about different varieties in the garden, is that everything comes down to our growing season and the lack of days in it, right? So you have to figure out what works best and what grows well for your zone. And here we just don't have a long season for a lot of things. So that's why my corn is actually a 62-day variety, which is wonderful. Anyway, so I planted it out fairly early, and we got a frost June, I want to say it was.
That's a late frost.
It was a late frost, and I had corn about that high at the time, and it just blasted them. So I came out here and was feeling pretty sorry for myself because everything was brown and wilted and just like dead. And so I put in a 4th bed of corn, hoping that something would grow. And then sure enough, it all came back, and it came back like with a
vengeance.
Yeah, like it really came back, and now it's producing exceptionally well, and the two plantings are more or less at the same speed, because this one was a little bit delayed because of the frost. And I think I've heard before, I don't know if it's necessarily true, but when corn gets damaged like that, it can handle a pretty big hit, as long as it's not too far advanced. And then when it comes back, instead of putting the energy into growing really tall because the leaves have been damaged, that's when it starts putting all its energy into cobs and producing it. So
interesting.
It's a theory. I don't know if that's for sure necessarily the case, but because this variety's always had a lot of cobs, like you'll notice down below, from one seed, there's 3 or 4 stalks that come off of it, and each one of those stalks has at least 1, if not 2 or 3 cobs.
Pretty high producer then.
It's wonderful. It's my favorite corn by far.
So when you harvest the garlic, then you hang it. For the average person, why is that? Why can't you just pull the garlic and eat it as it is?
Technically you can. You could go out to the field today, pull a bulb, and take it to your kitchen right away. What drying does for it is maximize its storage. So again, here in Alberta, we're looking at a long game where, we have fresh garlic right now, but it's not going to be growing again until May. So by drying it, it helps, the papers when you peel a garlic bulb. That's what it's doing, is drying those papers, which then seals off the bulb so no fungus can get in or mold or whatever. And so it's setting you up for a winter supply of garlic.
And how long do you have to dry it for?
It really depends on the year and the humidity in the air. Typically, it's like a 3 to 4 weeks.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, last year was more like 5 weeks because it was just so damp and took a long time.
So one thing I've noticed with commercial store-bought garlic compared to farm garlic is that the husk around the clove is a lot lighter. So you could take like a commercial grocery store clove, put it between your hands and rub it, and that husk will come off. But usually with the fresh farm garlic, it's quite a bit thicker. Mm-hmm. You almost have to cut it or peel it or crush it to get that off.
So essentially, that's because it's fresh.
Okay.
A lot of times, there's a really noticeable difference between a bulb that's only, a few weeks old, a couple months old, even 8 months old. There's such a difference between what's in the store, because lots of times the stuff in the store could be a year old, could be 2 years old. A lot of other countries, if it's imported in, depending on where it comes from, they don't necessarily have the same rules that we do, where it could be sprayed with a growth inhibitor, which is why it doesn't sprout. So really, it could be any age, and that's why you'll notice it's dry, or it cracks, or it comes apart really easily. And so it is convenient when you're cooking to get it off like that, but it's actually, when it's tough like that, like our farm garlic, that's what you want.
It's more protective. It is fresher in a sense then, because then that skin hasn't had the chance to break down.
Exactly.
So that's a good indication of freshness then.
Yeah, and if you ever notice like your bulbs are from the store starting to crack along the cloves, like you might see that, and that's another indication that might be slightly older garlic. So, that's a really nice thing about Alberta grown or fresh garlic of some kind, is the intense flavor that we have. And it's so noticeable, the difference, that it's, once you start eating this stuff, it's really hard to go back to the other kind.
Well, and in saying that, you've grown the garlic, but then over the course of the few years, you've made a number of different product lines from the garlic.
Yeah, it's been a really fun offshoot of it. And what it all comes down to is that up until this point, I worked in healthcare, and even though I'd quit my job to do the garden full time, I was still needing some kind of income throughout the winter. So I was working casually in the hospital in the winter. And basically, I just wanted something that was year round, which is where the garlic comes into play. So I still do the garden. It's 6 months intensive during the summer. It's very seasonal. The garlic, it grows during the summer, but the time that we actually get to play with it or create with it is the winter, which is when I have all the free time in the world. And it's been a really fun and cool experience getting to make these new, flavors and products and get to share them with people. And my brain is just constantly always going, and my dad and I bounce ideas off each other. And this summer we started a dip mix that was made with dehydrated garlic scapes. So already something kind of different. And then we went around for pretty much the whole month of June and foraged wild rose petals. And so we dehydrated them, put them together with a few other little spices. And the idea was so that you could mix it with cream cheese or sour cream or something and just have that kick of garlic with this pretty little flower petal in it. And we called it the Rosebriar blend, which is the area that we live in is called Rosebriar. And it's this kind of, like a tribute to the community that raised me. And it was just so neat that all of the ingredients came off our farm directly. And it's just another side to things that, I just never really saw coming.
And a different seasonality too, because
For sure.
lot of the garlic, again, whether it's your smoked black garlic, whether it's the pickled garlic, the garlic powder now, there's so many products in that realm of the clove itself. But then one thing that not a lot of people utilize or know about garlic is the garlic scapes. So then with the dip mix and your pickled garlic scapes now and a few other notions of it, it's a different time of the season, but a different, again, product line for the same product, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, garlic is one of those things that unfortunately, just with the growing season and the way it stores, we have a bit of a gap in our year here where there really isn't fresh garlic, right? Because typically this is harvested in August, it hangs till September, stores 6 to 8 months. So by March, April, we're kind of at the end of our supply, which we actually this year are trialing something with a spring plant garlic where it's planted in May, harvested in late September, possibly October, and it might carry through until, May, June maybe. But then that's where garlic scapes come into play, where they are the edible flowering stalk of a garlic plant. And so it's a slightly milder garlic flavor and kind of similar to an asparagus in texture. But it can be used essentially as your fresh garlic in any recipe. So instead of having to wait until September until we have fresh bulbs, we have garlic scapes in July. And so July, August, we've got scapes. We've made them into dehydrated products or powders or what have you, relish. And it's just another way to kind of prolong garlic season.
And for the garlic products, where are you predominantly selling them?
A lot of it is actually just direct from the farm here. With the last year, with the pandemic and everything, I was originally planning on doing big markets and being at the, different events and food festivals. And of course, those didn't happen. So it was kind of a year for pivoting and trying to rearrange things a little bit. And surprisingly, online orders have been probably our biggest form of sale, which I wasn't really expecting, but
the adaptation of the current market, people have been supportive, which is good.
And I think that's just kind of, the world that we've lived in this year. So it's something that I hope we'll be able to have those big markets again and be able to actually put a face to the product that you're buying and have a conversation one-on-one like this with whoever is, growing your food versus buying your products or what have you. Because I think that's a really important connection to make.
It builds that relationship between the consumer and the producer, which is really, really important. It's better than going to some big chain grocer and buying something you don't know where it's coming from.
For sure. And not only connection between consumer and producer, but also the consumer to their food.
Which is a really good point.
Yeah.
And how many bulbs did you grow this year?
We harvested about 50,000.
Is that the largest crop that you guys have done?
Very much so, yeah. We almost doubled our crop from last year, and then this fall, in just another few weeks here, we'll be planting probably 80,000 bulbs. So,
what's the main driving force behind the massive increase?
Part of it is to be self-sufficient. Garlic is one of those things that, one of these bulbs here, let's say this one has 6 cloves in it, so we could plant one bulb and get, 6 bulbs next year because each clove is a seed. So by having a bigger crop size, we're able to pull our own seed and then not have to buy off farm. And it's just a way of making it, kind of a full circle.
Yep.
With that being said, it's also something that's just been, the ball's been rolling and it's gone well so far. And it's one of those things where we have the land and I don't really want to be a grain farmer someday. So, if this is a niche market that we can get into and make happen, let's go for it.
Well, especially with the responsiveness that you have in getting and the diversity of products that you have been making, It definitely seems like there's a lot of growth potential in it.
For sure. And as always, I always have a big plans going along. And someday, maybe next year, what I'd love to do is to somehow focus more on the garlic in the fall and clear out the space for a big long table dinner and then do some farm to table things with my favorite chefs.
Especially with the wall of garlic.
Exactly.
Which would be pretty amazing. I'd like to thank Kristin from Fifthgengardens for her hospitality and amazing products. Thanks for watching. See you next time. on Friends of the Pit.